The water was colder than she expected. It bit at her bare ankles like sharp teeth, sending tiny shivers climbing up her legs, but Emily Carver welcomed the sting. For 3 days she had been smothered in heat, the relentless sun pressing down on her shoulders as she worked the ranch her father left behind. Dust clung to her skin, sweat tangled her hair, and grief old and new sat like a stone in her chest. She wanted to wash all of it away, if only for a moment. The lake lay hidden at the bottom of a rocky canyon, its surface smooth and glassy, broken only when the wind whispered across it. She had found it as a girl, sneaking away from chores to chase dragonflies at the water's edge, but she had not bathed in it for years. That day, though, something pulled her here, something more than thirst, more than heat. Perhaps it was longing. Perhaps it was desperation. She unfastened the buttons of her dress with clumsy fingers, glancing around the trees, though she knew no one ever came this far. The ranch hands had left long ago, unable to endure a woman giving orders. The townsfolk stayed to themselves, whispering about her behind church pews and mercantile counters. Here, at least, there was no one to watch her. Or so she believed. Her pale cotton dress slipped to the rocks, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt light. She waded into the water, gasping as the chill climbed her thighs, then her waist, until it hugged her chest and numbed her tired muscles. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes, letting the sunlight spill over her face. For a moment, the silence of the canyon was perfect. No gossip, no loneliness. No burden of a ranch too large for one woman's hands. Emily hummed softly, an old tune her mother once sang, though her voice cracked on the high notes. The sound rippled across the water, mixing with the calls of distant meadowlarks. She thought of her mother's hands weaving her hair, of her father's booming laugh, of the family she had lost too soon. In their absence, she had tried to be strong, but here, floating in the cool embrace of the lake, she felt like a child again, free, unguarded, unbroken. But she was not alone. High above, hidden in the shade of the pines, a man crouched low. His eyes, dark and unblinking, followed her every movement. He was still as stone, though his chest rose and fell in heavy rhythm. The Apache warrior Taza had come here not for her but for the elk he had been tracking. He had followed its trail of blood through the canyon until the sight of her stopped him cold at first. He thought her a vision, the pale curve of her shoulders breaking the lake's glassy surface, the sunlight glinting off wet strands of hair, the soft hum that carried across the water. It all struck him with an ache he had not felt since boyhood. He had seen settlers before, had fought against their rifles and their greed, but never like this. Never with such bewildering beauty. Taza's jaw clenched. He should leave. Turn away. To linger was dangerous for her and for him. Yet his feet would not move. His people taught that the heart was a warrior's enemy, a weakness to be mastered. But as he watched her laugh softly to herself, ripples spiraling outward from where she brushed her hands along the surface, something inside him betrayed that teaching. Desire, longing, and something far more dangerous. Recognition. Emily, unaware of the eyes upon her, swam deeper into the lake until her limbs ached with exertion. She floated on her back, staring up at the sky as white clouds drifted lazily overhead. For a moment, she imagined she belonged to no one, neither to the gossiping town, nor to her father's ranch, nor to the loneliness that stalked her nights. She was simply a woman 30 years old, alive in the wilderness, cradled by the water's secret. But the wilderness had secrets of its own. And one of them, silent, strong, and utterly captivated, was watching her from the trees. Taza had not meant to linger. When he followed the trail of the wounded elk into the canyon, his mind had been clear, sharpened like the edge of his knife. Hunger drove him, and duty. His people needed food. The tracks were fresh, drops of blood still glistening on the leaves. and every instinct told him to press on, but then he saw her. The sight of Emily Carver bathing in the lake hit him like a musket shot to the chest, sudden, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. At first he crouched in disbelief, half thinking she might vanish if he blinked. Pale skin gleamed against the dark water. Her laughter soft, private rose into the air, breaking the heavy silence of the canyon. Her hair, darkened with water, clung to her shoulders as she leaned back, eyes closed. Humming as though she belonged to the land itself, she should have been like any other settler woman, an intruder, one of the people who built fences across sacred trails, who carved scars into rivers and forests with their axes. Yet as he watched her, something inside him shifted, quiet but undeniable. Taza pressed his palm to the ground, steadying himself. His people had suffered too much at the hands of settlers. He had sworn never again to let his heart soften toward them. But there she was, floating in the water as if she were born from the canyon itself, her voice threading through the air like a song meant only for him. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. That was safer. Still, his gaze refused to leave her. Emily, meanwhile, had no notion of the eyes upon her. She swam clumsily in small circles, pausing often to float on her back. To Taza, there was something childlike in the way she seemed to forget the world. She was not guarded, not armored, not like the settlers he had seen who always carried suspicion in their eyes. A hawk circled above, its shadow gliding across the lake. Emily's head turned slightly, and for an instant Taza thought she might see him. His hand tightened around the bow at his side, though he made no sound. She only sighed and turned back to the sky, unaware. The pull inside him grew heavier. His heart beat too loudly in his chest, and he fought to calm it. He was a warrior, trained in silence and patience. He could track a deer for days without rest, blend into shadows until even the sharp-eyed raven overlooked him. Yet here, watching her drift lazily in the water, he felt exposed as though she had stripped him bare without even knowing. The air smelled of wet pine and sage, and Taza tried to ground himself in it. He forced his eyes away to the elk trail that led deeper into the canyon. The hunt was his purpose. But his gaze returned to her again, unwilling. Why her? Why now? He thought of his mother's words long ago, when she braided his hair as a boy. The heart is not your enemy, but it will make you weak if you do not respect it. He had not understood then. Now, as his chest ached with longing he could not name, he feared he finally did. Below, Emily began to wade toward the rocks. Water streamed down her arms, catching the sun in tiny rivers of light. She reached for her dress, lifting it carefully as though the fabric were something sacred. Taza inhaled sharply, every muscle taut with the need to move forward, back, anywhere to break the spell. His people had legends of spirits that lured men from their duty. Beautiful, dangerous, irresistible. For one reckless heartbeat, he wondered if she was such a spirit. He almost turned then, almost forced himself away. But the smallest sound left her lips a sigh, heavy and sad, as she pressed the damp fabric against her chest. It was not the sound of a spirit. It was the sound of a lonely woman. And against his will, that sound rooted him to the earth more firmly than any vow he had ever made. Taza stayed in the shadows, silent as stone, but something had already shifted. He no longer watched her with the eyes of a hunter. He watched her with the heart of a man who knew he was standing at the edge of something dangerous, and perhaps something meant for him. Emily had just stepped onto the shallow stones when a sound broke through the hush of the canyon. It was small, almost nothing, a dry twig snapping under weight, but it was enough to send a chill racing across her damp skin. She froze, clutching the dress she had pressed against her chest. Her breath caught. The canyon, moments before so quiet, suddenly felt alive with hidden eyes. "Who's there?" She called, her voice unsteady. echoing faintly against the rocks. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Emily's heart thudded hard in her chest. She scanned the tree line, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her body trembling from more than the cold water. She imagined a wolf, a drifter, a bandit, but not what stepped from the shadows. At first, she thought it was a vision born of fear. A tall figure emerged between the pines, moving with a predator's grace. Sunlight caught the copper sheen of his skin, the painted ochre lines on his chest, the beads and feathers that decorated him like fragments of the earth itself. Her eyes widened. He was a man, no, more than a man. An Apache. For a moment, Emily could not move. He stood still, the way a storm waits on the horizon before it breaks. His long black hair fell loose around his shoulders, damp with sweat or rain she could not tell. His muscles shifted under his skin as he stepped closer, bare-chested, the tribal jewelry across his neck catching the light. Her first instinct was fear. The stories she had heard in town dark tales whispered by men who wanted to keep women afraid rose like ghosts in her mind. Apaches were raiders, killers, heathens, they said. She had heard those words since girlhood. And now, here was one standing not 10 yards from her, close enough to end her with a single step. But he didn't. His gaze, dark, steady, unflinching, did not linger on her body the way she had braced for. Instead, he looked at her face, her eyes, with a depth that startled her more than any threat. Emily's voice shook as she found words. I didn't know anyone was here. She clutched the dress tighter, her bare feet slipping slightly on the wet stone. The Apache did not answer at first. He studied her as though deciding whether to speak at all. Finally, his voice came, low and careful. Each word touched with the rhythm of someone shaping a language not his own. "The water," he said, his tone like gravel softened by wind, "belongs to all." Emily swallowed. Her throat dried despite the water dripping from her hair. She nodded, though her body still quivered. "Yes, of course." He tilted his head slightly, as if testing her, reading her fear. "But you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You should not be alone here." The statement landed like both a warning and a strange kind of concern. Emily blinked at him, caught between mistrust and an inexplicable pull. He had not drawn a weapon. He had not shouted or threatened. His presence alone was powerful enough. "I can take care of myself," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. For the first time, a flicker of expression crossed his face, something sharp, almost like disbelief, and then it was gone. They stood in silence, the canyon holding its breath. The air smelled of pine and wet stone, of something ancient pressing between them. Emily felt as though the ground had shifted under her feet. Though she had not moved, he should have terrified her. And perhaps he did. But there was something else, something that made her pulse quicken for reasons she could not name. The Apache straightened, his presence towering yet calm. "I will go," he said at last. His eyes lingered on her one final moment, dark as the depths of the lake. Then he turned, melting back into the trees as silently as he had appeared. Emily stood rooted to the stone, clutching her dress with shaking hands, her breath shallow. Only when the last rustle of leaves faded did she realize her knees were weak. She sank to the rock, trembling. She had thought this canyon lake belonged to her alone. But now, she knew better. She was not alone at all, and the thought filled her with both dread and something far more dangerous: anticipation. Emily could not keep her thoughts from returning to him, no matter how many times she told herself it had been nothing. Just a chance encounter in the canyon. A frightening but harmless moment. The memory of his eyes lingered. She would be sweeping the porch of the ranch house or mending a torn shirt by the fire, and suddenly she would see them again, dark, unflinching, steady as if they had looked right through her. 3 days passed before she returned to the lake. She told herself it was practical. She needed water, and the canyon spring was cleaner than the muddy creek closer to the ranch. But as she filled her bucket, she found herself glancing toward the pines, her breath hitching at every rustle. He was there. Taza leaned against a tree, arms crossed over his chest, half in shadow. He had not moved as she approached, and she realized with a start that he might have been watching her long before she noticed. Emily's single quotes S hand tightened on the bucket handle. You again. His gaze did not waver. This is my path. Something inside her bristled. It's my father's land, she answered quickly, though even as she said it, she wondered if that claim meant anything here. Taza's jaw shifted, the smallest movement betraying something behind his calm. The land belongs to no one, he said. It was here before your father. It will remain when you are gone. Emily swallowed, unsure how to answer. There was no anger in his tone, only certainty, and it unsettled her more than if he had shouted. She lowered her eyes to the water, trying to steady herself. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The only sound was the soft trickle of the spring feeding the lake. Finally, she forced herself to speak again, her voice quieter. Why do you keep watching me? Taza tilted his head slightly, as though measuring the truth of her question. His words came slowly, carefully chosen. You are different. Emily's chest tightened. Different. The word stung and warmed her at the same time. Different from what? From the women in town who whispered about her? From the settlers he despised? She wanted to ask, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she said, People will talk if they see you here. They already think I'm strange enough? Strange? His brow furrowed. Emily laughed bitterly. I'm 30, unmarried, running a ranch by myself. The women whisper behind their fans. The men shake their heads. They don't say it out loud, but I know what they think. That I've failed. That I don't belong. Her confession startled even her. She had never spoken those words aloud, not to anyone. But somehow, standing here in the shadow of this man who should have terrified her, she felt her defenses crumble. Taza's eyes softened, just slightly. Among my people, strength is not failure. To live alone, to work with your hands, to endure, that is honor. Emily blinked at him, the world tilting beneath her. For years, all she had heard was pity or judgment or polite silence. But in his voice, there was neither. Only respect. She looked at him fully then, really looked. The hard lines of his body, the scars etched into his skin, the weight he carried in his stance, this was a man forged by hardship. And yet he stood here, speaking to her as if she were not a burden, not a failure, but something worthy. Her throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Taza's expression darkened, though not with anger. Because you should know your worth before others tell you lies. The word struck her like a stone in the chest. She felt heat rise in her face, not from shame but from something else, something dangerous. A crow cawed overhead, startling her. She broke eye contact, clutching her bucket to her chest as though it could shield her from what was happening inside. I should go, she whispered. He did not stop her. But as she turned, she felt his gaze on her, heavy and unyielding, until she disappeared back into the canyon. That night, lying alone in her father's house, Emily could still hear his voice in her ears. Strength is not failure. To endure is honor, and she wondered not for the first time if the canyon had given her more than just water. The night wrapped itself around the canyon like a velvet curtain, thick with the hum of crickets and the faint rush of wind threading through the pines. Evelyn sat on the flat stone where Taza had left her, her damp hair curling against her shoulders, her blanket pulled tightly around her frame. She had watched him melt into the shadows earlier, vanishing with the silence of a predator, and for a time she thought he might not return, but he did. When the branches stirred again, she lifted her head sharply, clutching the blanket tighter. From the darkness between the trees, he emerged tall, broad-shouldered, and shimmering in the moonlight as though carved from the night itself. His chest was bare, painted faintly with ochre markings that caught glimmers of silver light. His long black hair fell like a river over his shoulders, and the tribal jewelry at his neck caught the faint gleam of the stars. He carried something in his hand, and Evelyn's heart skipped. Wondering if it was a weapon. It wasn't. He stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, never threatening. He knelt on the ground before her and placed a bundle of herbs and a strip of soft leather on the stone at her side. His dark eyes lifted to hers, unreadable but not unkind. "For you," he said in a voice deep and low, his accent thick but his meaning clear. Evelyn blinked. "For me?" Her voice cracked, thin as a reed. He nodded once, then gestured toward her shoulder. She followed his hand, realizing the rough stone she had slipped on earlier had torn her skin. The wound was shallow, but blood had dried against her pale arm. She hadn't even noticed. He pointed to the herbs. "Bend to her injury." Evelyn hesitated, torn between suspicion and gratitude. Every lesson from her childhood whispered that she should fear him. Yet his eyes did not carry malice, only something steadier, something watchful. She extended her arm slowly. Taza's hands were surprisingly gentle for a man who looked forged for war. He ground the herbs between his palms, the fresh, sharp scent filling the cool air, and pressed them against her skin. She flinched, but the sting faded quickly, replaced by a soothing warmth. Then, with careful precision, he tied the strip of leather around her arm, securing the poultice in place. She watched him in silence, her chest rising and falling unevenly. His touch lingered only long enough to finish the knot, then he drew back, giving her space. "You helped me," she said softly, almost as if testing the truth of it. His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "You fell," he said. Then after a pause he added, "Alone." The word struck her. Alone, yes, she was. Alone in a canyon she did not know, with a man her world had told her to fear, and yet, in this moment, she felt less alone than she had in years. Why? She asked suddenly, her voice breaking the fragile stillness. "Why did you not leave me?" For the first time, his gaze softened. He did not smile, his face was too solemn for that, but his eyes carried something that words could not fully shape. He touched his chest with a closed fist, then pointed toward her. Her heart lurched. "I don't understand." "Heart," he said simply, his English broken but the meaning clear. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had no words for what unfurled inside her chest. Fear still lingered, yes, but beneath it, something else was blooming, an ache that was not entirely unwelcome. The wind rose, carrying the smell of pine and earth. A wolf howled in the distance, long and mournful, and Evelyn shivered. Taza rose fluidly to his feet, scanning the tree line. His posture shifted, protective, his muscles taut beneath the moonlight. "You?" "Stay," he said, nodding toward the stone. Safe. Her lips parted, but no protest came. She could only watch him vanish once more into the forest, his figure swallowed by shadow and silver. Left alone again, Evelyn clutched the blanket around her tighter. But this time it wasn't just fear pressing against her ribs. It was something else, something she dared not name. Though she felt it burning in her chest, she had come to the lake to cleanse herself of loneliness, to slip into its cool waters and forget the weight of the world for a few fleeting minutes. But now, under the vast Old West sky, she knew the water had given her something far stranger, a connection she hadn't sought, a bond she couldn't yet understand. And as she pressed her palm against the leather band he had tied, she whispered into the night, "Taza." The name felt dangerous on her lips yet alive, as though it had already changed something in her forever. The canyon seemed quieter than it had been the night before, but Evelyn could feel it. The stillness wasn't peace, it was warning. The morning sun poured into the trees, glinting against the lake's rippling surface, yet her body remained tense. She touched her shoulder, the place where Taza had bound her wound with leather. The herbs had done their work. The skin no longer throbbed, but the knot in her chest only grew tighter. Taza had returned at dawn, silent as always, carrying a small rabbit he'd trapped. He skinned it with fluid precision, roasted it over a fire built low between two rocks, and handed her the first piece without hesitation. She had refused at first, muttering that she could not take food from him. But the way his eyes lingered on her steady, dark, and almost disappointed made her accept. She chewed in silence, the taste of smoke and meat grounding her. Across the flames, Taza watched her with the patience of a mountain, his features unreadable yet unyielding. "You belong far from here," he said finally, his accent wrapping oddly around the English words. Evelyn froze, staring at him. "And you?" His gaze dropped briefly to the fire. "I belong only here." His hand swept outward toward the trees, the cliffs, the endless horizon of the canyon. Then he lifted his eyes to hers. "But danger comes." The words shivered through her like a sudden gust of wind. "What danger?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Men, your people." Her stomach knotted. She hadn't told anyone in town she was going to the lake, but she knew how rumors spread. Perhaps someone had followed her. Perhaps men with rifles and suspicion in their blood were already scouring the trails. Evelyn swallowed hard. "They'll think." Her voice faltered. "They'll think you took me." The corner of Taza's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite anger. "They always think this." Her heart ached at the quiet bitterness in his tone. She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to tell him she would speak for him, that she would stop any lies before they took root. But what power did her voice hold against a tide of men bent on fear and hate? The sound of a branch snapping made them both turn sharply. Taza rose to his feet in one swift motion, his entire body tense, alert. Evelyn followed his gaze. The forest seemed calm, but the stillness pressed heavier now, the kind that made every hair on the back of her neck rise. "They come," he said. His voice low. Panic fluttered in her chest. "What do we do?" He glanced at her, his dark eyes hardening with decision. "We run." Before she could argue, he grabbed her hand and pulled her into the trees. His grip was firm but not crushing, steady enough to keep her from stumbling as he led her through the undergrowth. The forest floor was damp beneath her bare feet, branches tugged at her hair, and her heart pounded against her ribs. Behind them, faint voices carried men's voices, growing clearer with each passing moment. "Check the lake." One barked. Evelyn's throat tightened. They were close. Too close. Taza led her up a narrow incline, weaving between boulders, his movements sure and silent. When they reached a high ridge, he pushed her gently against the stone, crouching low beside her. His hand covered hers, stilling her trembling fingers. "Quiet," he whispered. She nodded, pressing her lips shut, but her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Through the branches below, she saw them 3 men from town, rifles slung over their shoulders, boots heavy on the forest floor. They searched with the arrogance of men who believed the land belonged only to them, their laughter harsh against the stillness of the canyon. One of them kicked at her folded dress, still lying near the lake's edge. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. "She was here," one said, "and the Indian too," another growled. "Tracks lead this way." Evelyn pressed her back against the rock, her entire body trembling. She glanced at Taza, whose eyes never left the hunters below. His jaw was set, his muscles taut, but his hand remained steady on hers. In that moment, Evelyn understood this wasn't just about her anymore. If those men found them, It wouldn't matter what she said, what truth she told. They would paint Taza as a villain, and she as either his victim or his accomplice. Either way, blood would be spilled. The thought burned in her chest. Fierce and desperate, she could not let them kill him. The voices drifted farther down the trail, fading into the trees, but Evelyn knew they would circle back. Taza finally released her hand and leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "We move again," he murmured. "But faster." Her pulse hammered as she nodded. She wasn't ready for this, not for danger, not for running. Yet when his hand found hers again, she held tight. Because the truth, whispered in the wild thrum of her heartbeat, was this: she feared the men chasing them far more than the man at her side. And with every step deeper into the wilderness, she knew she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. The forest erupted with sound. Voices barked orders from below, boots crashing over rocks, rifles clattering against branches. Evelyn's lungs burned as she ran, her hand clenched tightly in Taza's, but she refused to let go. Every step forward was a step away from her old life. Every heartbeat a reminder that she was running not just from danger, but towards something she hadn't known she needed. Taza stopped suddenly, pulling her behind a thick pine. His chest rose and fell, muscles tight beneath the morning light. His long black hair clung to his face, damp with sweat, but his eyes remained sharp, listening to the echoes of pursuit. Evelyn could feel the rapid beat of his heart through the strength of his grip. "They close," he said, his voice low, urgent. Evelyn glanced over his shoulder, catching sight of shadows weaving through the undergrowth. The townsmen were relentless. She pressed her back against the bark, her pulse thrumming like a trapped bird. "What do we do?" His gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "Fight if we must." "But you," his words faltered, and for the first time she saw hesitation in him. He brushed a hand lightly across her cheek, the briefest, gentlest touch. "You run, live." Her throat tightened. "No," his brows furrowed. "I won't leave you," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "Not to them. Not to their hate." A rustle in the brush snapped both their heads around. A man stepped into view. Thomas Riley, one of the loudest men in town, rifle raised and face twisted with contempt. "There you are," he sneered, eyes darting between Evelyn and Taza. "I knew you weren't taken. You came to him on your own." Evelyn stiffened, but Taza's body shifted instantly, placing himself between her and Riley. The sight of him bare chest, tribal beads glinting, every line of his body taut with readiness was both terrifying and magnificent. "Step away from him, Evelyn." Riley barked. "Before it's too late." Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. She could feel Taza's strength like a shield before her, his presence steady, yet she knew if she said nothing now, Riley's voice would become the only truth carried back to town, summoning every scrap of courage. Evelyn stepped out from behind Taza. "No," she said, her voice steady now. "I won't." Riley's eyes widened. "You've lost your damn mind." He glanced at Taza, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I'll put him down, and then we'll take you home where you belong." Evelyn moved before she could think, stepping directly into the line of fire. "If you shoot him," she said fiercely, "you'll have to shoot me too." The clearing went silent, the weight of her words hanging like thunder in the still air. Taza's breath caught behind her, but he didn't pull her back. His hand only brushed her arm, firm, grounding her. Riley's face twisted, fury and disbelief warring within him. The other men emerged from the trees now, rifles raised but uncertain, watching the strange tableau unfold. "She's bewitched," one muttered. Evelyn's eyes burned, her voice cracking with emotion. "I am not bewitched. I am choosing." She turned slightly, glancing back at Taza. His dark eyes held hers, silent but full of fire. Then she faced the men again, her voice louder. I am choosing him." The words struck like a gunshot. The men shifted uneasily, their grip on their rifles loosening, doubt seeping into their anger. Riley spat on the ground, lowering his weapon just a fraction. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. The town won't take kindly to it." "Then let the town live with it," she said. Her chin high, though her body trembled. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, with a curse under his breath, Riley turned and shoved his way back into the trees, the others trailing reluctantly behind. Their footsteps faded, swallowed by the forest. Evelyn sagged against the pine, her breath shuddering. Taza stepped forward, his hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You." "Brave," he murmured, his voice thick with something deeper than admiration. Her hand rose to cover his, pressing it tighter to her cheek. "No," she whispered. "Just finally honest." For a long moment they stood in silence, the forest holding its breath. Then Taza leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the morning light. The world around them might rage with judgment, but here, in this canyon, a new truth had been carved, one that belonged only to them. And as the sun rose higher, Evelyn knew that nothing would ever pull her back to the life she'd lived before. She had crossed the line, and on the other side stood Taza, not as captor, not as savior, but as something far more dangerous and far more precious, her choice.